Vitamins. That's what you need to look at. This video will serve as the first of a few videos on the topic of vitamins. Now, this video in particular is going to go through more of a little overview, very briefly, and then deal with vitamin A. When looking at vitamins, we have to remember back to the idea of macro versus micronutrients. We've already covered the macronutrients. We've gone through lipids and proteins and carbohydrates. But now we have to deal with more of the micronutrients. Micronutrients are ones you don't need as much of in your diet. They're still important, you still need them, but you need them in lower quantities. And that's where vitamins fall in. Vitamins are part of the micronutrients that you need. Now, our vitamins can be broken up into water and lipid soluble, or fat soluble. The water soluble vitamins are vitamins A and B, while the fat or lipid soluble vitamins are vitamins A, D, E, and K. So what's the difference? Well, the difference is how they're absorbed into your system. Because when you're absorbing these vitamins in your small intestines, it depends on what method they're utilizing. So in the case of the water-soluble vitamins, they simply go right through that plasma membrane. Easy for absorption, no problems. Nothing special is needed. But in the case of the fat-soluble vitamins, well, those have to have a little of an extra process. They're absorbed just like the phospholipids are absorbed that we discussed in the past. So what's happening here is, when they're trying to be solubilized, so they're being brought into the cell, first of all, you have to deal with chylomicrons. Remember that whole coating we talked about. Then it's heading into the lymphatic system. From the lymphatic system, it heads into your blood system. From the blood, it's being diverted back into the liver for processing. So it's a little more of a process for the fat-soluble vitamins. And that's important because you have to have a little bit of fat with your absorption. So if you're ingesting A, D, E, or K, those fat-soluble vitamins, but you're not having any fat in the food that you're eating with them, that can cause a problem as far as absorption goes. It won't be as efficient to absorb those vitamins. So it's actually kind of important to make sure you have some lipids when you're ingesting those vitamins. It doesn't mean go out and have a huge fatty meal, but there are healthy fats. There are ways to have lipids brought into your diet to aid that absorption while still fulfilling your requirements of your complete nutrition. So the two different categories. We're going to start with the fat-soluble vitamins. So we'll start with vitamin A. Now, vitamin A is going to be known as the retinoids. So vitamin A, retinoids, interchangeable there. Your vitamin A or your retinoids a lot of times are coming from animal sources. You'll get them as something called retinol. Now that's OL at the end, retinol. The reason that O is important there is because once you've absorbed and brought in that retinol with an O, you then convert it into two different things. It's converted into retinoic acid, but it's also converted into retinol with an A. So retinol with an A is the converted form of retinol with the O. So that one little letter there makes a difference. But that's the animal side of things. The plant sources, you can still get vitamin A, but you don't get as much from the plant sources if you have a balanced diet of animal and plant products. Now, if you're following a vegan diet, no animal, different story here. So this is talking about if you're having animal and plant sources. So if you have both sources, about 10% or so is going to come from your plant sources. Now, in the case of plants, you're looking at the carotenoids. The carotenoids are things like beta carotene, for example, from carrots, you heard of that. But these carotenoids are the plants. The problem is they're not as easy to absorb. They're more difficult for absorption of your system. Now, because they're more difficult, that means you can't get as much of them out of the food. You still can get some, but that's why majority comes from an animal source if you're ingesting animal products. So what are these vitamin A molecules going to do? Why do you need vitamin A? One of the things that vitamin A can do is it can act like a hormone, kind of mimic in certain ways. So it can help with signaling in your systems. You can also have vitamin A altering protein right now at the DNA levels. So if you get right down to the DNA, it can alter how the proteins are being formed and how they function. You're looking at your skin. Healthy skin, nice intact skin, everything's perfectly functional. Vitamin A helps with skin quality. You're looking at the linings and coverings of various different tissues in your body. Again, vitamin A has a lot of things going on. Vitamin A can help with enzymatic activity, especially in regards to free radicals. Now, I've talked about free radicals in previous videos. We know that free radicals aren't the best thing for your body because they can cause damage to your tissues, damage at the cell level. So those free radicals need to be kind of neutralized and removed from your system. That means vitamin A can help with that free radical control. Vitamin A, the one you might have heard before, is it's important for vision. Your vitamin A intake helps with your vision, especially your night vision. So by eating and ingesting vitamin A, you can help to maintain or potentially strengthen your night vision. That's why a lot of times if individuals have a vitamin A deficit, the first thing to be impacted could be their night vision. Just not quite as sharp, not quite as clear, not as easy to see or differentiate things in low light. But the vitamin A also helps with your immune system. It's helping with the strength of your immune system. Because a lot of times if you have low vitamin A, another potential problem would be the amount of sickness you endure. Now, it's not getting sick, it's how sick you get when you are sick. So there's been numerous studies that have looked at vitamin A levels if you're appropriate or you're low, and then the extent of the illness. They showed that it doesn't prevent you from getting sick, but it'll lessen the severity of the illness that you get. So you won't be as sick. You'll be able to get healthier a little bit quicker. So it helps the immune system to prevent a larger sickness, a larger illness. But that's only one piece of it. Because when you're sick, it's your overall nutrition that's coming into play. Because your entire immune system isn't just based on vitamin A. It's based on all the molecules you're ingesting. So you have those white blood cells, you have all the other components of your immune system able to fight off that infection. So yes, vitamin A can help, but really it's overall health of your nutritional impact that makes a difference. So what else can vitamin A do? Well, it helps with growth and development in your body, especially your eyes, your ears, and your brain. Now, I've already mentioned eyes and vision, so that's no problem. I already dealt with that a little bit. But again, lack of vitamin A not only impacts vision, but it can impact your hearing ability. Individuals that are developing and growing with a lack of vitamin A, they've shown have a little more problematic with hearing issues. They're also looking into a link now to the brain development and vitamin A levels, where a lack of vitamin A or a deficit of vitamin A could have an impact on the developmental features of the brain. Now, the problem here is they can't 100% rule that as the answer because so much goes into brain development, so many different factors. Because a lot of times when someone is vitamin A deficient, there are other deficiencies as well also occurring. So it's hard to figure out which deficiency really is impacting that, or if they're all working together to cause the problem. So that's some constant research that's going on right now. It's still current and still trying to develop. They're not really sure what the answer is, but it's an interesting thing to think about. One more reason to keep vitamin A at appropriate levels. Now you're saying, okay, levels of it. Well, can you have too much? Sure. But it's not going to naturally occur. Vitamin A toxicity, or known as hypervitaminosis, hyper meaning too much, that really can't happen very easily with just a healthy diet. Usually that would occur if you have excess amount of supplements increasing your vitamin A consumption. Reason being is you need to reach about 10 times the recommended daily allowance of vitamin A. To hit 10 times the allowance, it's really, really hard to do with just diet alone. So if there's too many supplements bringing in vitamin A, that's when that potentially could kick in. So I mentioned it's hard to do in the diet to get that much. So where does it come from? We know there's animal and plant sources. But the animal sources, as long as someone's not a vegan, vegan's a different story again. In the case of vegan, you only use the plant sources. But in the case of the animal sources, if you're eating that will have an easier absorption for your system. Looking at things like milk, cheese, eggs. If you eat liver has it. Plant sources. Any of the brightly colored vegetables or fruits looking at here. Things like carrots, yams. Looking at the colored peppers, so red, yellow, colored peppers, orange. Tomatoes. Because all those colors are from the carotenoids. So by eating a range of colored vegetables, you're getting a range of the carotenoids there. For example, carrots have the carotene in them. That's what gives that orange color. Little side note, if you're ever looking at the fall foliage, for example, the colors of the leaves, that's the carotenoids. So really, when you're eating your diet, colored vegetables, that's what gets you the vitamin A, the carotenoids. So what are we looking at for RDA? Now, in the case of RDA, we're looking at retinol activity equivalents. The idea here is, because you have different plant and animal sources, if you have animal sources, your body absorbs it easier. If you have plant sources, it doesn't absorb it as easily, so you need more of it. So what you're looking at is the equivalent of a certain amount here. Or if it's a case of plant-based, you need a little bit more. Animal-based, you need a little less. So it's source dependent. That's why looking at these RDA is looking at the retinol activity equivalents. So it doesn't matter which source you're using, you can convert it into what this account is. So you're looking at the chart here, the idea is, depending on age, you have a little bit of a different amount all the way up through adulthood. But the RDA, that recommended daily allowance, as long as you're eating a healthy, balanced diet, you should hopefully be able to hit it without too much of a problem. Until the next video.